Welcome to All In Always, the podcast where service, sacrifice, and leadership are more than stories. They're a way of life. I'm Chris Garcia, and every episode, we take a look behind the uniform to share the experiences, lessons, and moments that shaped a lifetime of service. Whether you're a veteran, first responder, currently serving, a family member, or someone who simply wants to better understand this life, I'm glad you're here. If these conversations mean something to you, follow the podcast, subscribe on YouTube, and share this episode with somebody who would appreciate hearing it. Now, let's get into today's story. Some of the most important missions of my career are the ones I can't even talk about. During my time in Hawaii, which is where I went after Great Lakes, I served with a squadron whose capabilities were unlike anything else in the Navy. We flew over land, tracked dangerous people, supported forces on the ground, and operated in places most people will never see. Then I would return home, get on my Harley with my wife, and ride through paradise. Those 3 years were two completely different lives, and they ended with my final flight in the P3. Before I continue, some aspects of this assignment remain protected by agreements and security obligations that did not end when I retired. Everything I share in this episode is based on my personal experience and limited to information I am comfortable discussing publicly. There are operational details, technologies, locations, and activities that I will intentionally leave out. So I got orders to Kaneohe Bay, which is located on the island of Oahu, and it is at Marine Corps Base, Hawaii, and I was attached to VPU-2. It's a stark contrast to where I had been the prior 3 years, pushing boots in Great Lakes, Illinois. And now all of a sudden, I'm in this beautiful place, very temperate conditions. It is essentially paradise. Unlike the majority of the squadrons that were still operating back then, I had already spent a lot of years flying different P3s, but essentially they were all the same. Most of the capabilities were all the same. The type of sensors that they use and the people on board were essentially the same on almost every single aircraft. The aircraft at VPU-2 was somewhat different. It was configured differently, and at the same time, you couldn't see any changes if you stood on the outside looking in. You wouldn't know the difference. Only the folks who lived, breathed, ate, and slept on this airplane during missions knew exactly what its capabilities were. But it was just a different operational world. And there is a specific mission for almost every aircraft. Mostly it's focused on a platform of that particular aircraft. But there are different types of P3s. Anybody who knows anything about the P3 community or any kind of VP squadron, including VQ squadrons, knows that there are different types of aircraft out there with different types of setups, different types of capabilities to meet the conditions required in order to be successful in whatever mission that they may be carrying out. In this case, VPU-2 had airplanes that had capabilities unlike any other aircraft in the fleet. It was heavily modified. We put 23 crew members on board, each of them working at their dedicated stations. Each of them, like me, signed an NDA that stated basically that we wouldn't discuss any of the operating capabilities and sensors that were configured on board the aircraft. And so you won't hear about any of that. But what I am here to talk about is the type of teamwork you needed in order to do a mission of that importance. And I can go as far as to say that in certain operating conditions that were highly sensitive, there were times where this particular aircraft could be sent to be overhead during those types of situations. And so a couple that I know that I could speak to, and I wasn't a part of it, but I know that VPU-2 was the squadron that was participating in these events. One of them was the search for Marcus Luttrell during the whole lone survivor SEAL evolution. They were overhead during that time. And then they're in Benghazi. Now, there's no unimportant seat on the aircraft, whether you're the pilot, the flight engineer who's sitting up front, keeping the airplane in the air, the operators who are in the back, looking at the screens for long hours, taking notes and following mission parameters, the mission commanders that were in charge of the entire mission and the crew, and every specialist on board contributed to the same objective. And so there were emerging technologies that we were using on board the aircraft, probably well known at this stage, but much of what we were using at the time was still evolving. We weren't simply operating equipment, we were helping prove what it could do in real world conditions. So, in that aspect, the squadron being considered special projects, there was a lot of real world conditions that we were checking to make sure that these particular sensors and this technology could help us fight the war on terror. So some of the things that I can talk about just briefly is about what kind of missions that we were conducting, and we'll keep it at a high level. There's a lot of interest in it. I'm pretty sure that those technologies are being used across the globe today by various militaries. I can't imagine that we're the only people that have these abilities. But once again, I was back to doing overland missions. That's 100% of the mission of the VPU style P3. Special projects wasn't about sub hunting. It was about identifying patterns of movement, patterns of life, maintaining surveillance, providing overwatch for movements on the ground. Some of this stuff is kind of standard that we were doing and things that I had done in the past on previous P3 missions. But I think this one was a little bit more intricate, a lot more complex. The capabilities that were established to have been using during that time were unknown to most. And so they like to say it's super secret squirrel. And for a minute there, we thought when the transition from the P3 to the P8 was going to happen, that that platform was going to go away completely and we wouldn't be able to establish something like that on the P8, which is the 737. Apparently, that changed. And so VPU-2 never got sundown as expected, and they're still in operation today, probably doing the same great work they have always been doing, but at a higher level, I'm sure, because it's been almost 6 years since I've been out. And I can tell you that as fast as technology evolves, I can't imagine the kind of capabilities that that platform has now. But it boils down to us being up there to be able to help build situational awareness for the decision makers. You know, they're seeing what we see. We're communicating with them to let them know what we're seeing. Sometimes we bring back the intel that they need to make future decisions, and whether or not they enact on them is left to be seen. But we helped find patterns. We maintained eyes on areas of interest and provided information to the people responsible for making decisions on the ground. Beyond that, there are details I still can't discuss. I did, however, have the opportunity to go to a couple places that I had never been before, two of which were Kuwait and the Philippines. And we don't deploy in this squadron. There are many detachments, and they're usually about 60 days long. So it's not that bad. And it's easy to come back and be home for a couple weeks and turn around and go out again because they are that short. But more importantly, the missions that we were executing in that aircraft were some of the greatest that I was able to witness in my time in the Navy. So every chance I got, did I want to go? Absolutely. And we flew into places around the world, but most of what I saw was inside a secure compound or a flight line, the aircraft. And of course, it was a place to sleep. So the hooches in Kuwait or Djibouti, it didn't matter. Container living unit in Djibouti, which I talked about on a previous episode, horrible living conditions. I didn't think they could get any worse, but honestly, the little shacks that they had at the Spec Ops compound at Ali Al Salim in Kuwait, the living conditions weren't that bad. And who knew that it could get so damn cold in the desert? But yeah, so there was that. I met a lot of interesting people in my time with them outside of course, Hawaii and the squadron itself. You know, you come into contact with all sorts of different people. Most of the time, where we were at, we were stationed at an Air Force base, but we were also on a secure compound that housed a lot of the JSOC guys that were involved in some of them tier 1 efforts, those missions that you only hear about taking place in the dark. So those folks are interesting, and they're humans just like you and I. They just are super patriotic and have no fear. So very, very proud that we do that kind of work. And I'm very honored to have met those folks along the way. Our time in the Philippines wasn't one where you're taking vacations. It is kind of an arduous schedule because for whatever reason, all the missions were in the evening into the late morning. So we'd get up at like 10 o'clock at night and we'd launch out and we'd fly through the night to get where we're going and fly over a hot area, just kind of monitoring the situation and reporting back. But there were some things going on in the Philippines. It just goes to show that you really don't understand the reach of terrorism until you fly all over the world and you see it with your own eyes, how it spreads like a fucking virus. So Philippines had an issue with insurgents. And so, we were out there fighting the good fight, monitoring the situation on the ground. And I got to watch the Philippine Air Force just bomb the shit out of one of their cities. It's like burning down the house to kill one spider. But hey, to each their own. They wanted to eradicate the problem. They thought that was the best way they could do it. Personally, I don't think turning a whole city into a pile of rubble and evacuating their people to do that is the right way to do it. But, we're just there to help. We can recommend next steps and that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, it's their call. So yeah, those missions, they begin in the evening and continue through the night to late morning. The hardest part was trying to sleep. It was just hard to acclimate yourself to be able to sleep during the day. Your body just doesn't want to do it. And I bought one of those eye masks that you got to wear during the day to keep the light out, because no matter how much you close the curtains and put the covers over your head, sleep's not coming. And I'm the type of person that I need complete darkness in order to get some rest. So funny story, they only had the ones you buy at the mall across the street from the hotel, and they had, I don't know, I think mine was a teddy bear. I looked like a teddy bear with it. It was stupid, but you know what? It did the job, So, and on top of that, I think we were taking Ambien, and if anybody knows anything about Ambien and you have an adverse reaction to it, you probably got some funny stories. And I know some of the guys that were on the crew that were taking Ambien. They would wake up in some precarious places and they would have some nasty dreams, and they'd be fighting themselves in the middle of the night, wondering, why am I standing up at the end of my bed naked when I went to bed fully clothed? That sort of thing. So Ambien, probably not a good thing. I chose not to take it. I felt like it didn't work anyway. But it's tough. When you're doing missions like that, you get used to them after a while, but it wasn't a continuous thing. So we were bouncing back and forth. You get some time off, and then you have to maintain the schedule. And that's the worst part about it. So not a whole lot of vacation opportunities to partake in while we were there, although we did help clean out an orphanage. So that was pretty cool. And then one of the guys was selected to chief while he was there. So me and a couple of the other chiefs that were there, we were able to mentor him and take him through our little initiation process, because he was forward deployed and, he couldn't hook up with the rest of his chief selects in order to do those reindeer games. But we gave him what for. He still was going to get the experience. And although it didn't last as long as ours did, when he got back, he was definitely getting back with his chief selects and getting the proper beat down that is required in order to get them anchors. So preparing while the sun is going down, it's a different story. The climate there is definitely something different. I mean, it is tropical. It monsooned quite a bit. Every time I was out there outside pre-flight in the aircraft, they didn't have a good drainage system. So I wish I would have bought some galoshes, but God damn, man, there was just water everywhere when it would rain. And that's what I remember the most, is being soaking wet. I literally have to bring an extra flight suit and some socks to change into before we took off, or I'd have been miserable and cold the rest of the flight. So the fatigue is just inherent. You're up all night. And if you're not used to it, and your body just never does get used to it, you're tired. And it just gets to the point where it's just wearing you thin. It's probably not healthy. But what's funny about all that, and I've said this before, is when the mission is important, when what you're doing is important, none of that matters, right? Everybody is down for what they need to do, and nobody's complaining. And yeah, so all I had was this thing on my face to help me sleep, no blackout curtains, people running up and down because it is a resort hotel that we were at. And yes, I know I'm complaining about not being able to get sleep at a resort hotel. Well, hey, I don't get to choose where they put me. I mean, we could stay at the barracks on base, I'm sure, but somebody thought better of it. And hey, you know what? I enjoyed my stay there. So 23 people on board this aircraft is a packed house. And as a senior flight engineer, that was my job, was to take care of at least the enlisted guys and gals that were in the back of the aircraft, part of the crew, make sure I'm leading them and mentoring them and getting them what they need if there is anything. But we were all pretty independent. They all knew what they needed to do. We all worked well together. So lucky for me, I didn't have to intervene at all. Right. So nobody had to defer anything to the chief because we see when you got officers around, your mission commander pulls rank and he says, hey, you know what? I'll take care of the crew. It kind of takes that weight off my shoulders. Not a burden whatsoever. I enjoy leading people, but if they don't need to be led, then I'm going to let them handle it on their own. And they did very well. So everybody was there, all 23 of us doing great things, no complaint, no problems. And it was one of the better missions. Mission success always depends on the trust you have across the crew. And that goes for everyone. Because if you can't trust the guy sitting next to you or the pilot up front or even the observer sitting looking at the window, then you've got issues. And it creates problems to where you're probably not going to be as successful. But we didn't ever have that. And rank did not make one person's contribution more important than another. When the mission started, we needed every person on board to perform, to meet the standard or exceed all those things that in the end, the result is we are bringing home what we need in order to call the mission a success. And it was one of those things too, where I didn't really have an opportunity after I put the anchors on to go to my next command and become a more seasoned chief and to be more confident in my role as a leader at that level because I went to Great Lakes first. And, when you're training recruits, the only people that you're really leading is maybe the petty officers who are the partners in the push. And where they're at anyway, as leaders, there's not a whole lot of mentoring or coaching that needs to be done unless it just completely gets out of hand. So I didn't have a whole lot of opportunity before I got to VPU to actually utilize my ability or my capability as a chief petty officer and a leader and to be able to execute my role to the fullest like I wanted to do. But I definitely had that opportunity when I got to Hawaii and when I checked into VPU too. So I was able to interact with more. I mean, right away, I took over a shop. I took over the 120 Work Center, which is the airframe shop. And that I requested to do that even before I walked through the door. Master Chief is like, absolutely, we could use you. Let's do it. So that was my first real experience of dealing with real sailors, right? Because recruits will go to the ends of the earth for you just because they don't know any better. But your real leadership acumen, your skill and capability gets tested when you're working with real sailors out in the fleet who've been around for a while, and even the ones that didn't learn a whole lot in boot camp, because there's that out there. There is that type of sailor that's going to challenge you and challenge you in your role. And then coming from Great Lakes and coming from that boot camp environment, every little thing that I've seen somebody do is just annoying the shit out of me all the time, whether it be people putting their hands in their pockets or not standing at attention when you felt like they should be, not saluting when they were supposed to, chewing gum in uniform. I mean, I had a list as long as my arm of things that I was ready to dress people down about every single day. And it wears off because you realize that You are never going to get boot camp to come outside of boot camp. It's just not going to happen. Everything that a sailor needs to know sticks with them, but how much they choose to retain and utilize on a daily basis in a practical role is completely up to them. And you always got to be there as a constant reminder. So all those things that I used to hear about during Chiefs initiation, about how when you put the anchors on, your job has started right away. You know, you don't have to wait for any of this to happen. So I would say I had a nice little interim in that 3 years I went to Great Lakes. But when I came to Hawaii, everything changed, especially when I was in charge of the shop. And everybody's got some kind of personal issues, whether it's some domestic conflicts at home, a DWI at 2 o'clock in the morning, where I'm trying to bail a sailor out at 5 o'clock in the morning. That stuff happens. And it did happen to me. So, and I think I became a better leader for it. So it gave me an opportunity to actually use my chops. And then Chief season, I was actually able to participate. And in some cases, I had larger roles in those chief seasons, whether if I was a sheriff, which was maintaining order and discipline, or if I was a mentor, if I was in charge of one of the programs that made the chief season successful, as it always is, I had more of a responsibility, more so than I did since I had made chief. So you got to figure I'd been around for 3 years with anchors on and finally make it somewhere where I'm actually able to do something with my leadership skills and participate more often than I had been able to when I was at Great Lakes, because I was constantly pushing recruits out the door. So it kind of takes away from it. But you still always make time. And so I had an opportunity during those chief seasons to mentor or actually sponsor 2 different chief selects. And I already mentioned the one that was in the Philippines with us. The other time I was still at home. I chose to stay home during that period of time because it was so close to chief season, and I had some bigger responsibilities as part of the board, running those programs and making sure that everything goes off without a hitch. So definitely being able to stay through final night of chief season in Hawaii ain't no thing, because it's just Budamus Maximus every day. It doesn't matter what time of day it is or what time of year it is. Hawaii is always a great place to be. The temperature's always just perfect. And there's just no other way to describe it. It is paradise. So the best I could do during those seasons was just kind of instill upon these guys and gals the same things that were instilled upon me. And that's the process, right? What you're doing is you're basically bestowing upon somebody else who is in the shoes that you were wearing, not but a few years ago when you went through yourself. So it's always a factor of remembering what it was like and trying to give them the best experience that you can. Teach them responsibility, the humility, trust, service, and accountability, and all those things that you learned during your own season, and making sure that they understand how to properly lead their sailors to help them become capable and self-reliant. And that was something that I learned, and it's something that we all learn and that we continue passing that down from generation to generation. And so far, it's worked out pretty well. And then there's the other side of life, outside of the aircraft, not being on the flight line, getting away from the hangar and all the busyness. There was lots to do in Hawaii. And it was one of the places that I felt like I spent as much time with my squadron families as I did with my own personal family. And I think that's just because the camaraderie had at this particular place. You spent a lot of time with these folks, and they were just all around great people. I don't think that I have a whole lot to compare to. I spent a lot of time in Jacksonville, Florida, I think about 12 years to be exact. And the caliber of people I met there, phenomenal, but it just in a different way. When I was in Hawaii, and even though I was only there for 3 years, going in and out, flying overseas and then coming back for a little while and going out again, that rotation, everybody's on it. But you become close with those people for whatever reason. I don't know if it was because I was coming to the end of my career. I don't know if it was because I was in khakis and I was a chief petty officer and things were different and how I operated was different, or maybe it was just because I was growing up a little bit, during that time. It could have been a myriad of things, but my experience and the people that I had those experiences with in and outside the airplane were some of the best that I will ever know. And those memories will stick with me until I die because they were great. But I purchased a Harley Davidson when I was in Djibouti and I had it delivered to Hawaii. And I had never ridden a motorcycle before in my life. I mean, who could have a better place to ride a Harley Davidson motorcycle than around the island of Oahu? And with my wife, no less. So, I had to learn in a hurry. It was a big bike, weighed 750 pounds, and the Navy's kind enough to send you through motorcycle safety course. It's a requirement anyway. So I learned fast. And the one thing I didn't do was ride fast. And it's not one of those places where you want to anyway. But if you're going to have a motorcycle anywhere and get to enjoy and get the most out of it, the island of Oahu is probably that place. There was so much outdoor activity. I was in the best shape of my life. My kids were in the best shape of their lives. They were living their best lives, that's for sure. They tell me about it all the time, and they miss it as well. So, but hiking, exploring, that was a weekly occurrence, if not daily. The beaches, if you're not going to the beach, what are you even doing there? Right? Some of the mountains, the overlooks, and the island roads. But what I enjoyed the most was we would take an anniversary trip each year that we were there, and we would go visit a different island each time. And luckily, I had an opportunity to, first go to Kauai, and then we doubled up and we went to Maui and spent some time on Front Street, which is unfortunately no longer there because of the fires in Maui. But I am honored and privileged to have had the opportunity to see that beautiful landscape before God took it away from us. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking about getting stationed in Hawaii, whether it be at Pearl Harbor or Kaneohe Bay, I got to tell you, if you pass the opportunity up, you're just Looney Tunes, because to me, that's ludicrous. Anybody who gets an opportunity to go to an island like Oahu, come on. And yeah, do you get island fever? Sure you do. It's small. It's small, but you know what? You learn to figure it out. You learn to find ways to keep you busy. There's so much to do. If you're not keeping busy, then maybe it's just not for you. But it was nice. It was one of those places where it was easy to build memories outside the Navy. And there was a lot of memories to be made, and we made every one of them. Overseas, my world was windowless rooms, secure compounds, long flights, and missions I couldn't discuss. But at home, it was ocean air, mountain roads, my wife riding behind me on the bike, and my children just out there doing whatever they wanted, exploring Hawaii. I hear some of their stories now, and I'm absolutely flabbergasted. But it was that time in their lives, and, they lived. But the island hopping part was not just my tradition or our tradition. It was a lot of people's tradition. It was something you got to do. You can't get stuck on that one island. There are so many other places to go, and it is a cheap hop, skip, and a jump to a different island. And I'm telling you, every island has its own little ecosystem. All you got to do is go around the perimeter of the island and see how different it really is. I mean, you can start on one side, which is lush and kind of jungle like and tropical. And then you drive to the other side of the island and it's like a desert. It's almost like you're driving through the Mojave. And then you go up into the mountains and now you're in the woods, and it's an amazing thing. And I would go back in a heartbeat. Fortunately, when you retire, you got to pay your own way. So it may not happen anytime soon, but hopefully sooner than I think. So the relationships you form while you're in the Navy in general are some of the most important and long lasting that you'll ever have. And it's not even necessary to stay in touch with those people, because while you're in, sooner or later, you're going to cross paths with them anyway. And being a VP guy, not just a flight engineer, but a guy who flew on P3s, and that's the only squadron or type of squadron that I would go to, I knew that I was going to cross paths with those folks again. And I did. But I ended up spending so much time at NAS Jacksonville and then taking the break from the platform entirely by going up to Great Lakes, but then rounding it out with VPU2 in such a beautiful place I think had a lot to do with the bonds that I created while I was there. I think I knew I was coming to the end, not necessarily of my career. There was still the hope of making senior chief and maybe staying in an extra couple of years. I don't think at that point I had really come to the realization that that wasn't going to happen. And 24 years was going to be it for me. And besides, I was only going to stay in for 20 anyway in the beginning, even after I made chief, because I made chief at 14 years. I was like, I'm going to be in for 6 years and then I'll get out. Well, the Navy said, or the military rather said, if you have the post 9/11 GI Bill, then you have to stay in an extra 4 years to be able to transfer that to a loved one or a dependent. And I didn't know that. And I waited too long. And I knew I was going to give it to my youngest, my daughter, who was going to go to college and become a psychologist. And if I hadn't waited so long, I might have made that 20. But because I did, I ended up having to stay another 4 years, which is fine. But I'm going to wrap this whole thing up in this particular episode because my follow-on orders to Millington, Tennessee do not bear the weight or the interest that I feel is necessary for its own episode. There was not a whole lot there that I would enjoy talking about, nor would interest anybody who was listening. So there's that. But some of the strongest bonds in the military come from working under pressure with people who understand the mission. They understand the sacrifice and even the parts that you can't explain to anybody else. And that's the biggest thing. I think that's where the relationships are strengthened and those bonds are solidified because we know that we can't have the same kind of conversations with somebody who's never been in. And so, I've been retired for nearly 5-6 years and I still speak with people from the squadron. And it may not be on the phone and it may not be every day, but it's happened, right? They're still out there. We still shoot each other a message from time to time, drop a Facebook post, right? Whatever. And then from time to time, we might have a gathering. But a lot of the guys that I grew up with, they're retired just like me. So I hope they're living their best life. I know I am. And that tells you more about the experience than any mission story that I could give you. And like I said, rounding it out, because VPU2 would be where it would all come to a close. And what I mean is my final flight, the last flight that I would fly in a P3 ever, because I knew that the place that I was going to, I wouldn't be flying anymore. And so it was time to wrap it up. And that last flight, it didn't really feel as emotional in the start as it felt when it ended. And even now, looking back, I think to myself, I wish I would have enjoyed it a little bit more or not have taken it for granted like I did. I don't know. I felt like I could have been more emotionally attached to that. Maybe it's just not who I am. But, thinking now, like that last walk around, doing a pre-flight, and I did everything meticulously and slower than I normally do. I just kind of, the weight was still there, understanding that it would be my last flight. But I just didn't get attached to the idea about it, right? So, climbing that boarding ladder for the last time, sitting in the flight engineer seat in the flight station, getting ready for that checklist one last time. Starting them engines, I miss that. And those are some of the memories that I can take from that last flight is how enjoyable those moments, no matter how small they were, and how much they meant to me and mean more to me now than they ever did. But those familiar sounds and the vibrations, the propeller movement, looking around the flight station, and then we went over, and actually I get to pick where we were flying, and I took some pictures. I got out of the seat. I did all those things that I think every flight engineer or every aircrewman does, every pilot does when they fly the P3 for one last time, because it is a momentous occasion. It is quite an event. And so I wanted to document it, and we ended up flying over Kauai, and it was an area that looks just like the Grand Canyon. It was something else. I have these pictures, and it's amazing to me that an area like that in paradise can look so much like something on the mainland. Just blows my mind. So I definitely want to go there. Kauai was just, a short 30-minute flight after takeoff, right? The landing gear comes up and it's smooth sailing after that. Fly some circles around there. It was just a training flight, nothing big to talk about. It's not like we were going on this long mission, but that was it. Landing and shutting down those engines for the last time, walking off the aircraft. And it's pretty standard when you come off the aircraft on your last flight, you're going to get wetted down, which basically everybody's got a bucket full of water, or they got a hose, or, they send the fire trucks out. Somebody's got an igloo cooler with 5 gallons of water, and you're prepared for it. And, coming down the ladder, you've already taken off all your gear. You don't want it to get wet. Most of the time, you're wearing your air safe vest, and somebody will come and pull the lobes out, and it looks like, you're ready to be saved. If you were floating in the ocean, it's just a fun time. Everybody takes turns at you, shakes your hand, gives you that hug, and tells you what a great job you did and how much you're going to miss it. And they're right. I spent a major portion of my life in that aircraft. And that last shutdown represented the end of an identity for me, not merely another flight. And so I had spent years listening to those engines and watching those gauges and sitting between the pilots and having trivia and reading magazines and telling jokes and all sorts of things that we did, to keep ourselves occupied when things could get boring, and they could. But then one day the engine shut down, you complete that checklist, and you walk off the airplane, and you know that you will never occupy that seat again. But I regret none of it. I enjoyed every bit of it. And if I was asked to do it again, even now, I would raise my hand in a heartbeat. So Hawaii gave me some of the most demanding missions of my career and some of the best years my family ever shared. I worked beside people I trusted with my life. I helped mentor the next generation of chiefs. I saw places I didn't think I'd see again, and I saw places that I'd never imagined myself going in the first place. Even when most of the view came from inside a secure compound or through the window of a P3. And somehow over the Pacific during those final years, a chapter that had defined most of my Navy career quietly came to an end. My last flight in the P3 was not the end of my service, though, but it was the end of a life that I had known for a very, very long time. And so to finally round it out and make this the last episode of this 24-year career that I was privileged to have in the United States Navy, the next stop would be Millington, Tennessee, where I would join Navy Recruiting Region West. And my whole job as a senior classifier was to basically find jobs for would-be recruits coming into the Navy. And it doesn't get any more boring than that. But it doesn't make it less important either. I spent 3 years there. I enjoyed the downtime. I enjoyed being able to get my private pilot's license while I was there, among other things. I got to watch my son go to Navy boot camp and graduate while I was there. My daughter started her freshman year of college at Mississippi State. And my other son, we left in Hawaii to do great things. And so the last 3 years of my career, although they seem kind of benign and not as exciting as flying in the P3 or turning civilians into sailors, but nonetheless, there was a part of my life that I will always have a memory of. And so when I think about my storied career in the Navy, I always think about the people that made the most impact on me, and I think about the people that I impacted. And all in all, at the end of the day, was my mission in the Navy a success? It absolutely 100%, for sure, without a doubt, was. And so that's the end of my story. And I hope that I get an opportunity to share more stories like that from my fellow brothers and sisters who either are still in the Navy or have gotten out that would like to share theirs as well. And with that, I say thank you For those that are out there that are still fighting the good fight, thank you for your service. For those that have retired or hung it up, thank you for yours. We'll see you next time. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this episode brought back memories, taught you something new, or reminded you of someone who served, I'd appreciate it if you share it with them. If you're enjoying the podcast, be sure to follow on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe, leave a comment, and let me know what part of today's story resonated with you. I read every comment, and many of them inspire future episodes. You can also find me at notabystander.com, where every purchase helps support the first responder community and the missions behind the podcast. Until next time, I'm Chris Garcia. Take care of each other. Never stop serving those around you. And remember, be all in, always.